We are starting a communication in English in order to make the new astrology in France well known in the English-speaking countries, and especially in the United States of America. My name is Jacques Halbronn, and I have created what we can call a radically new form of astrology, which is quite different from the usual practices. Especially, we don't use the charts, we don't erect charts for birth or for any event. We have an idea of progressive, evolutive astrology, which has not to be stopped at a certain moment for some reason. And we believe in a sort of what we could call a astrology of the time and not astrology of the space. Astrology of the space is the idea of the chart, including all sorts of planets and factors that you are going to combine between each other. Astrology of the time, on the contrary, is an astrology which will consider a specific cycle and which will consider its division and subdivisions, the periods which will structure this cycle in a certain duration. And we believe that these two astrologies we have to choose, in the 21st century we'll have to choose between these two types of astrology. And as you know, there is also the work of Gauquelin in France, which constitutes another type of astrology also, which is not the traditional one. So astrology in France will, in a way, could be defined by what Gauquelin has done in a certain field, and what I have myself done in the field of what we could call, in a certain way, mundane astrology. Because individual astrology is, for me, just derived from mundane astrology. It has not its specific structure. The work of Gauquelin is more connected, by the way, with individual astrology. It is connected, in any case, with what we've just called the time of the astrology of space. That is, we consider what happens at a certain moment. A certain moment being a very specific moment, and that means, in fact, it's a matter of space and not of time, because a time is not a moment, a time is a duration, it's a cycle. And Gauquelin was never very much interested in cycles, at least in his own work, even if he has mentioned cycles in his books, but it was just marginal, in fact. Although he could appear as a sort of validation of his work, but his work is not really a cyclic story. So I would like, in this hour of talk, of chat, I would like to develop two lines. One of the lines is how we can explain Gauquelin's work, and the second line is how we can explain that mundane astrology could exist. How has it started? When, where, and how it has to be reformed. So let's start with Michel Gauquelin and his wife, Françoise, if you want. And let's say that I've been thinking about the signification, interpretation of his work for a long time, and for a long time I didn't have the right tools to understand and explain his work. And I really think that the astrology of Gauquelin is very different. It's very different from the sort of astrology I myself have developed. But they are both extremely I would say convincing in their own ways, their respective ways. It might be surprising for some of you to hear that the work of Gauquelin might need to be interpreted from the point of view of parapsychology. I know it's a delicate subject. Parapsychology, and more generally divination, is precisely connected with the notion of space. Divination is based generally on what you do at a certain moment. It is not developed in time. The process is very short, very brief. That's why we can understand why Gauquelin didn't have any results with the planets in the zodiac, in the signs. While he did have results with houses. And that's also why the work of Gauquelin doesn't confirm the chart as such, but only certain aspects of the chart. Actually, the chart is a sort of mixture between this sort of oral astrology, very punctual astrology at a very specific instant, and which has to do with the houses. It's a mixture of that with the zodiacal process of the planets during their cycle. And I believe that we cannot mix the two systems. And that's why I'm hostile to the chart as it is today. That's been already like that for a long time, actually. So I believe that, and Gauquelin has underlined this point, I believe that there is some process which will make the child appear, get out. And this moment when the child gets out, goes out, is extracted from the mother, is taken from the mother. This moment is a mysterious moment. Why at this moment, why at this second does it happen? Why not earlier in the day, or later in the day or in the night? And it's possible to propose sort of explanations saying that the child will know at what moment the planet, this planet, is in a specific situation. He knows at what moment it corresponds to what he is, etc., etc. And that's why Gauquelin didn't find, according to him, results when the operation was artificially produced and provoked. The operation of birth. So, what makes a child, I mean, the whole system of child and mother and whatever, what makes a child want to pass to another dimension is a mystery. So, from this point of view, I would say that it is probable that considering that the planets are circulating one day after the other on a very specific and precise way, as a sort of wheel of chance, wheel of fortune. And would it be possible that some force, some entity will influence the child to produce this change in his situation at the moment of the appearance of his planet on the horizon or in culmination, etc. You see what I mean? I mean that the planets are not at all here producing any effect. They are just symbols following a certain order, which is of course different from one day to the other, or at least which changes rather often. And they circulate, like in the casino, a roulette circulates. And at the moment a certain planet is at a certain point, the process of birth is produced. I call it parapsychology because I don't think the child by himself can do that, can determine when he has to be born. I'm not sure that he knows where the planets are when he was born, at the moment he is born. I don't think I know. So I think there is someone, some beings which may know about all this and are able also to produce this change in the process of the child, so that the two things will coincide when the child appears and what happens in the sky, in the heaven, at this very moment. So that is what I have to say about Gauquelin. That's not to be rejected, but it doesn't prove astrology. It's not really astrology. Or, if you prefer, it shows that the planets are not necessarily active. They are also symbols, they are also images, and we are going to come back to this idea later on. So it is a statute of the planet which is at stake here. And it's very essential in my own work. The tendency today is, in France especially, and it was more a fact 50 years ago, the tendency was to reject from astrology anything which was not astronomically based. That's why an important astrologer like Jean-Pierre Nicolas in the 60s had created an astrology which was not at all tolerant to any sort of movement which would not be real astronomy. Although it did define the planets from their mutual place in the solar system, and not from the fact that they were active in a certain point of the zodiac. So in fact, he also used the solar system to define the planets. Before he applies the planets to the zodiac and interprets their positions in such a situation. But this tendency to refuse from in astrology anything which would not be based on real astronomical data has been less and less influent in the last decades. As a matter of fact, Indian astrology, in the dasas, D-A-S-A-S, had already developed the idea that the different periods of life, although they might be connected with the names of the planets, were by no means produced by the position of the planet at a certain moment in the zodiac. So the zodiacal position of the planet is not an essential issue. The cosmological situation is certainly, in many ways, more significant. That is, where the planet is compared with other planets, not in the chart, but in the solar system itself. Why Mars is between Jupiter and the Earth or whatever. So I would like to pass to the other aspect of my talk, which is my own work, which is called two-square astrology. Two squares because there is a blue square and a red square, and these two squares are put one upon the other, so that you will have successively red, blue, red, blue, red, blue, red, sort of octagon. But two-square astrology, two squares astrology, only uses one planet, which is Saturn. We call it the motricial, the motor planet. The planet which is the basis of the whole process, the whole zodiacal activity. Motricity of Saturn. Saturn being a sort of neutral process, neutral planet. But in its cycle, it will take the color of 4 planets. Not because it will meet really the planets, but because the division of Saturn's cycle in 4 periods is associated with the 4 planets. That is to say, Venus, Mercury, Mars and Jupiter, which are the planets of the middle within the solar system. 2 planets before the Earth and 2 planets after the Earth. These 4 planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, correspond to the 4 seasons. Venus with spring, Mercury with summer, Mars with autumn, and Jupiter with winter. So we don't need any more zodiac. Zodiac is only an astronomical reality. We divide the zodiac in 4 sections of 90 degrees, and it makes 7 years for Saturn to cross a period of 7 years. This period of 7 years is itself divided in 4 sections. Corresponding to the 4 planets which I have just mentioned: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter. Each section covers around 21 months, which gives 84 months for 7 years. 7 years, which is the 4th of a complete Saturn cycle. So, we could call these planets zodiacal planets, in the sense that they are substituted to the 12 signs. 12 signs being the result of the influence of the symbolic influence of the 12 months, 12 connection between moon and sun. But in fact, it is what happens during the months which is important. That is, the 4 different positions of the moon: conjunction, square, opposition of the square, crossing, increasing moon, etc. So those planets, which, as a matter of fact, are connected with the theory of the rulerships, and the theory of rulerships does connect signs and planets on a very artificial way, which has nothing to do with the real position of this planet at this moment. It doesn't depend on that. So we have to get familiar to the signification of these 4 planets, which are not really planets in a way, which are planets which are not interesting from the point of view of their position in the zodiac, but only from the positive view of their position in the solar system in general. So it is necessary to redefine the planets in order to be able to use them in the framework of mundane astrology. Because if you say just Mercury is his intelligence, it will not help you very much to make predictions. You have to be more specific about what you mean by Mercury, what you mean by Jupiter, what you mean by Venus, what you mean by Mars. And their symbolism has to be reconstructed from the point of view of a certain approach of astrology. So we have, if we take the entire cycle of Saturn of 28 years, about, you will have 16 divisions of 21 months. The problem here is that we are not working with planets above, beyond Saturn, which are so popular among mundane astrologers. We are working with Saturn, which as period of 7 years, which doesn't stay very long in a sign, whatever, compared with our trans-Saturnian planets. Saturn has a cycle which is nice. I mean, it's nice because it's not too long, it's not too short, it's not too slow, it's not too quick. It's a good measure. So the public can learn this sort of astrology very quickly. You can get familiar with this sort of astrology, with only one cycle, with only 4 possibilities, which are repeated, but only 4 possibilities of variations. So it's much more easy to learn and to assimilate and to use than customary astrology. Everybody can understand that there is this change in mentalities, in approach of the world, when this sector, the theory of sectors, is followed properly. And I want really people to use astrology by themselves and not through the astrologers. Because astrology to be demonstrated needs a long work, an enormous amount of work, and it can only be achieved by a great deal of people who will apply astrology in their own knowledge, in their own expertise, because it is not possible that astrologers should be able to do whatever. Through astrology, he cannot really be able to speak on any subject, in spite of what he pretends, of course. It is necessary for mundane astrology to produce tools, models, which everybody will be able to follow and to understand. Like for instance, when people watch a football game, they understand the rules. They know about what happens. The same with astrology. Astrology should not be the only property, exclusive property of a few specialists. If it has to be popular, it has to be accepted and understood by a great deal of people of all sorts. We will attend the show of the world through these sort of techniques. This astrology which I describe is not my invention. It is what I've rediscovered. It is a pre-Ptolemean astrology. Ptolemy in the 2nd century of Christian era, AD, is responsible for considerable transformation of astrology, especially concerning the rulerships. And as you know, Ptolemy associates Sagittarius not to Mars but to Jupiter. Mercury, Gemini doesn't associate to Venus but to Mercury, etc., etc. As an historian, I have reconstituted the story and the different moments of transformation of this original system through the use of criteria which were not really relevant. So, as I said, it is not my invention. It is true that I have developed, for instance, the idea of blue period and red period by my observation. But after a certain moment, I discover that all this was already kept in astrology, but kept in a very occult way. That is, they would not speak, astrology would not speak about the quartet constituted by Mars, Mercury, Venus and Jupiter. So most astrologers do not make difference between Saturn and Jupiter, for instance, although for me it's totally different. Saturn is the process, the male process, if you can say it, and the 4 planets are the female process. That's the Sun and the Moon. The difference is that the Moon does really exist, while in astrology those 4 planets are only images. They could be used astronomically because of their movement, but in fact this is not the point. They are images. And Saturn had images like the zodiac, like the sign of the zodiac. And Saturn will determine under what planet we are at a certain moment, or we will be at a certain moment. So the question remains how this second astrology, the first being the one by Gauquelin, has been created, has been structured at the beginning. I think originally the system is a sort of calendar. The mankind, certain society wanted to create a calendar which would correspond to a more important process, not a few weeks or not 1 year, but a few years. And Saturn is a sort of, the Saturnian calendar is precisely what astrology is originally. Now that this calendar might continue to exist even when we have lost the consciousness of it, is a point, is an important point, of course. We have to accept the idea that we have integrated this Saturnian cycle in our own mind, and that when we were born we developed this Saturnian sensibility. It is totally different from the instant astrology. Here it is a long process which takes many months and years. It is not like the instant astrology of what happens at a certain moment when the child leaves its mother for another reality. We cannot consider these two astrologies as being part of the same system of interpretation of science. No, it's different. With not only 4 stars astrology, the royal stars, Aldebaran, Regulus, Antares and Fomalhaut, which divide more almost naturally the cycle of Saturn in 4 periods of 7 years, roughly speaking. Which means that the conjunction of Saturn with each of these stars every 7 years will start a new cycle of 7 years, itself divided in 4 periods corresponding to the 4 planets, which we have mentioned several times. That is in the proper order: Venus, Mercury, Mars and Jupiter. So this is what we could call a new zodiac, or the initial zodiac. These 4 planets, in fact, themselves correspond to the cycle of seasons. If you study the almanacs and the images in the almanacs, you will see that men do not do the same things in July or in November, etc. They have different labors from period to period. So I advise to abandon in a certain way the 12 signs, whatever their basis is: conjunction of the Sun and Moon, entrance of Saturn with a vernal point, etc. With Saturn, the cycle of Saturn, we don't have aspects. Aspects do not exist in this system. The only aspect which exists are conjunctions. Approximate conjunctions is enough. Because as you can see, astrology is certainly using astronomy, but in a rather superficial way. It takes from astronomy only what interests her and leaves what is outside its scheme. That's why I regret that so many astrologers today have the religion of the planets and consider that all planets, all asteroids between Mars and Jupiter, especially Chiron, etc., all this has its legitimacy as a planet in the zodiac, in the chart, in the map, etc., which I don't accept. I believe that we don't have to use names of gods which have not been given in the antiquity, and I believe we have enough work to do with the cycle of Saturn and the phases, the periods of these four gods that we have mentioned many times already. They were before us, but we were not seeing us. So 4 planets, 4 stars, 4 seasons, 4 elements, 4 positions of the moon. See? It's obvious that the world by itself is not based on the 4, but astrology wants to keep in consciousness, in its consciousness, what has to do with the 4. It's a projection of the 4 upon the world. The world is not 4, but the world from the point of view of astrology is 4. So there are planets which are only expression of the cycle of certain aspects of the circle of Saturn, but Saturn itself only is a neutral planet which can change totally in connection with the particularity of each of the phases, each of the sections. To reach the problem of modern astrology, it is essential for me that everybody would know about the system, everybody will follow the system from period to period, everybody will know what is Venusian period, what is a Mercurian period, what is a Jupiterian period, what is a Martian period. Astrology can only be validated by this very popular process of hundreds of thousands of people checking the model and discussing between each other about the model. It's not in the secret of the astrological consultation in its cabinet that astrology will get out of its ghetto and will stop to be a pariah. So I think what is impressive with my style of astrology is that everything is very clear. The system is clear, the division of the system is clear. We don't use a lot of planets, we don't combine planets in different ways. It's a very recurrent, repeating system. And every period corresponds to a certain predominance of a certain tendency, and we are not going to combine different planets at the same time to explain different things. And it is a very clear position under a certain position of Saturn in a certain planetary atmosphere, a great deal of events, of processes, have to show the same profile. See? Astrology can only win respectability by being very clear, very neat, with very little margin of adaptation, and it is not possible for astrology to keep so many planets, so many connections, so many combinations, which will permit to explain everything, anything at a certain moment. This attitude has to stop, because it corresponds to a sort of charlatanism. As I have seen recently, some people compare 1989 to 2011. I think it's quite interesting, because in fact it's true that we have to compare things which are comparable, even if they succeed, if they take place in very different parts of the world. It has nothing to do with that. Astrology is not connected with a certain country or a certain geographical situation. Astrology is a science of mankind, and it has to exist in the most various, in the most different situations. Not Russia, not this or that. The idea that astrology, which could astrologically predict where a certain event will take place, is a delusion. On the contrary, it should not be. Any historical event should exist in many places at the same time. I mean, it only exists in a certain place. It is not conclusive. So I suggest that, well, I'm not really speaking to astrologers, because I know astrologers have their own habits, but I want to touch the public, the general audience, and to present an astrology which would be accessible, understandable by everybody, like people understand what is a football game or a chess game. I have not yet developed in this chat what I intend by Venus, Mercury, Mars and Saturn. But what I want to underline for this intervention, which is going to its end, this for the first time, I want to insist that Mars has nothing to do with Aries. Mars has nothing to do with the spring. Mars is this force of autumn, is something which doesn't correspond at all to a want of union, a want of harmony between everybody. On the contrary, Mars is a tendency, an attempt to show that what looks different is not really what looks similar is not really similar. That it's a delusion. That some people try to give the impression that they are like the others, and it is not true. So Mars is the refusal of unity. Mars will therefore develop an idea of inequality, and this inequality will culminate with Jupiter, the king, the prince, who is by all means unequal. But after Jupiter comes a new cycle which starts with Venus, and which will at this time reconsider the role of the people in general, the mankind in general, being more important in a certain way than geniuses, leaders, etc. So Venus is union, Mercury is generally not well interpreted. Mercury is really something which is not totally honest. It's an attempt to, it's a trick. No, you try to look different from what you are. Precisely to be like the others, you have to hide what you are. But Mars will be vigilant and say, oh, this is not true. He says he's like that, it's not true. He's a liar. He's a fake. He's a crook. So, very, very roughly, you understand that I produce quite a new form of astrology, which could, of course, be applicable also to individuals. Everybody is concerned by this astrology, the general astrology. If we are in a period based on Venus, we are going to be influenced by this Venus. Our psychology will evolve in a Venusian way, each of us. And if afterwards it passes to Mercury, the same, we are going also to be Mercurian, to explore lines which are not totally clear, which try to dissimulate things, dissimulate in order to assimilate. So, in a few words to conclude this intervention, I would say that these 4 planets are replacing the zodiac. The zodiac becomes only 4 periods of 3 signs, which is a technical definition, but in fact each period of 3 signs is a unity. It's a unity, but at the same time it's divided in 4 and not in 3. Everything in astrology has to be divided by 4. There's no room for 12. There's room for 16, but not for 12. That's why there are 16 divisions of the cycle of Saturn, not 12. 12 is only an astronomical fact which is not necessarily to be taken by astrologers seriously. Astrologers, and that will be my last word, are not obliged to utilize everything the astronomers discover, everything which exists in the heaven. It is not an obligation for astrology to accept all this. On the contrary, astrology is domesticating, in a way, astronomy, only taking from astronomy what is necessary to its development. And it is a pity that modern astrologers want to build astrology upon an astronomical basis, including the new planets which could be discovered. This is not the task of astrology to be assimilated to astronomy. From its beginning, astrology is more connected with an idea of structuring, building, rebuilding this cosmos, and not building itself from the point of view of the cosmos. My astrology has something to do with German astrology. It may be considered as a continuation of Albertin's work. in many ways. I've met myself Bertin in 1971, 40 years ago, in July, August in Hallen. And of course, Bertin does not limit astrology to Saturn, but he tries to simplify astrology with this 90 degrees system, with his midpoints. And retrospectively, I think I've been influenced by him at a certain level, a certain stage. So one can consider my work as a redefinition of the zodiac. I've been working on the history of the zodiac for a long time, and I think that the zodiac is corrected, that it comes from the seasons, and that there is no reason to attribute too many planets to each sign. It's possible to prove why Venus is connected with spring and Mercury with the summer, and Mars with autumn, and Jupiter with winter. It is necessary for that to study the origins of the zodiac, books of hours, calendars of the shepherds, and then you will understand the signification of those 4 planets as being part, in fact, of the ancient zodiacal system. So these 4 planets are the origins of the zodiac in a way. So it's good and normal to return to these 4 planets. At least, even if you want to sophisticate and complexify my astrology, I think that I'm doing is, and I'm giving is really essential. It is the basis of astrology. It can be developed in different ways. It can be applied in different ways, but it is the basis of astrology, and this basis works. This basis can be used and understood by everybody, and it is not the monopoly of an astrologer. Everybody can use and can learn this sort of astrology in a very short time and check by himself what it means. And it is very far from the technicity that modern astrology also today demands. I don't believe that the studies of astrology should take a long time. I think astrology is like a car. You learn the system, and then you go with your car and you do what you have to do. It's not something which it's not like buying a car with a chauffeur. You have to be yourself your own chauffeur, and you have to be your own judge about the value of astrology. That is why you have to put astrology in the hands of millions of people, so they can check by themselves the value of astrology, and they can discuss between themselves of the value of astrology. And in my way, there is a new definition of what is an astrologer, which is not someone who knows everything about everything, but knows only to explain, can only explain the system very briefly to someone, and this someone will apply the system in his own life, in his own field, in his own expertise.